It's a wonderful day in the homiehood, a wonderful day for a homie. Won't you be my homie to Taro? Yeah, today is Wednesday, February 1st, the first day of February, and we are here to go over the top headlines that we're checking out this morning. So every day I wake up, I read the Globe and Mail, and I collect some of the top stories. However, I found today's paper a little kind of like lackluster because I was looking for this one story that I had heard about last night in particular, and it was about the sister of a Montreal man who died while illegally jailed, and the sister wants video footage released. So this is actually a story about this young man, Nicous DeAndre Spring, who died after intervention by guards in a detention center in Montreal, and and I think it's really important for us to get this video footage out because for some reason they're sitting on it. The police are saying that they are choosing to withhold the video because they're investigating any potential bad play that was involved with this story. However, the family of this man, Nicous DeAndre Spring, is calling for this video to be publicly released. So, people who are familiar with this type of investigation are saying that there's really no reason that this video cannot be publicly published, and it's really kind of just concerning that the truth is being withheld. So the sister here is saying, the way that Nicous, I hope I'm saying their name right, passed away is that they put a hood on him, and they also used pepper spray. So apparently that is a deadly combination that is like, it's not part of regular policing practices, and there's no reason that he should have died. The other part of the story is that a judge had ordered Nicous to be released on December 23rd, but he was not released. He was still behind bars on December 24th, and December 24th is the day that he died. So we still don't know all the details of this story. My suspicion is that he was probably like, hey, I'm not even supposed to be here right now, and for some reason that escalated. I don't know why the prison guards put a hood and used pepper spray on him, because I think that's a deadly combination. I think maybe you can like suffocate from that instance. And his sister says that, we need to release this video and the public deserves to know. And this is something that is like mirroring the protests that we're seeing in the United States and Memphis right now. So I think it's very important for this moment for us to like mobilize about the prison industrial complex and policing here in Canada, and this is like, I think, the time to like really be fighting back on this Black Lives Matter issue. So I hope they'll be like following this story a bit more, and hopefully they release the video. Moving on, Toronto is as we covered yesterday, Ontario had a court ruling that called the removal of certain encampments in certain cities in certain situations illegal. So Toronto, the Canadian press here is saying that this is kind of opening Toronto up to a legal challenge, because basically it's providing a more nuanced look at how they are providing shelters. So basically, things that are happening in cities like Toronto and Kitchener and Peterborough, when they remove somebody's tent or encampment, they are saying that this is a violation of a constitutional right to shelter. Now, the long time excuse that has been used is that there is shelter for these folks, but they're just choosing not to access it. However, the recent ruling about this is now kind of just saying, well, if that is not always the case, and we know that the shelter system is not adequate. We know that, for example, if someone is addicted to drugs and they are there's an open bed in a shelter. However, if that shelter does not allow you to use drugs in that space, that's not really an open bed for that person. So it really is like making this a more nuanced situation. And I think it's going to put a lot of cities, municipalities, kind of like on the back foot and make them think twice about like, hey, if we remove this encampment, we might be in violation of someone's like human rights, which I think is like should be obviously the case, but obviously it's important for there to be legal repercussions when things are happening like this. So another thing that's happening in Ontario, but also all over Canada, this is kind of just like a case study, is that a daycare was thrown into turmoil after it was bought by a corporate chain. So this is a trend that we're seeing in Canada because private equity and pension funds are showing a growing interest in the daycare industry, because as the federal government has committed to having $10 a day daycare, there's all of this money being pumped into these different education systems, many of which are already privatized. So, or independently owned, like in the case of this one. So what happens is that these bigger businesses, they snatch up a whole bunch of daycare centers, and they don't always deliver the same quality of care. And it's kind of the same story as everywhere, where labor is the major cost. And when this new company comes in and is trying to be like, oh well, we need to make money off of these families and these children, I guess, which it seems like a little evil. Um, the quality of care can decrease because they aren't really willing to pay their staff the same, and that's what happened in this place. Um, it's Lullabaloo, I think, is the corporation, and they bought this independently owned ma and pa daycare. And just after a couple days of purchasing it, they offered the staff and the workers like a new contract, and it was a base salary of $15.50. So basically, they snatched it up. I think they had made promises that, hey, don't worry, everyone's gonna keep their job, and even the previous owners, were gonna continue their roles. But basically, they made it a very toxic environment. They basically made it a place where everyone is getting a pay cut, and it's just a bit concerning that something like this can happen. And more nuance needs to be part of the approach when we're looking to do a $10 daycare program across the entire country, right? In other cases, all of this federal funding can go to a daycare center, and it's being referred to here even as the daycare industry, which is like kind of like dehumanizing in a way, right? But one example that was in this article was that somebody could open two corporations, one that is the daycare and one that is the landlord to the daycare. So essentially, you could buy a building and rent it to your daycare, the daycare that you also own, and all of the money that is going from federal funding into that daycare is essentially just being like used as like rent money for your other business. So there's a lot of ways that with this all of this new funding, $30 billion, and the hope of having $10 a day for families. There's a lot of ways that you can potentially kind of exploit this new government program, and we don't really know if there's a significant oversight for it yet. So this isn't the only way that it could get exploited, but there needs to be more protections, like, because why? This is like our tax dollars at work, and they should be working for us and not being funneled up to a bunch of rich people who can afford to own buildings and essentially treat childcare like it's an industry and not something that is supposed to just be beneficial for families and the development of young minds in our nation, right? So moving on, Parliament is poised to vote on asylum for Uyghurs fleeing China. So this is a motion that's being put on by Liberal backbencher Samir Zubiri. and is calling on Canada to accept 10,000 Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities who are now living in third countries. So there has been reports from the UN saying that the Chinese government is committing human rights violations against Muslim people, specifically the Muslim Uyghur population. I have heard stories that like this notion that they have been doing this has been contested. Although I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to discern media, especially when it pertains to China, because there is a lot of like xenophobia and a pressure to kind of demonize China here in Canada. So I sometimes try to look at this stuff with a bit of a skeptical eye. However, I do think, if the UN is saying that human rights violations are happening, and if there are 10,000 people who have been displaced and they're Uyghur Muslims, like I'm interested to hear their story. Or sorry, there's probably more than 10,000, right? But Canada is saying it would be open to accepting $10,000 if this motion passes. So yeah, as Oi Polloi is saying in chat, both sides propagandize issues, so it's impossible to know, right? So I genuinely am wanting to hear more from like the survivors of these human rights violations. And we all countries have a horrible history, including Canada. China is denying these human rights violations and saying that they're not committing a genocide, but we really don't know. Antifer is saying, don't they have massive work camps? I read about this. Yeah, I mean, that's what I've heard as well, but I've also heard that there's actually not definitive proof of that. So, even the UN's report it doesn't like 100% confirm, I don't think. So let's see. Michelle Bachelet, until recently the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, visited Xinjiang last year, and her office's report from August says China has committed serious human rights violations against Uyghur Muslims in the region, which may amount to crimes against humanity. Right? Like it's a very odd language. How come they cannot definitively say that there's crimes against humanity happening? So again, it's when you're reading news about China in Canada from a Canadian publication like the Globe and Mail, it's really important to just like kind of keep an open mind, be a little skeptical, and understand that there's a motivation to kind of like demonize China, right? That doesn't mean that they are perfect over in China, or we should just become like China stands and support everything they do. But when we're dealing with countries that like the West, specifically like the US, has a vested interest in competing with, so like China and Russia, it's really important to kind of like keep a critical eye when we're thinking about that kind of stuff. So lastly, this is just a quick little article, but Poilievre, John Oliver covered it. He was pretty worked up. True. I mean, like I said, I personally, I don't know. I'm choosing to remain an open mind. I think it probably is happening. Again, I would love to hear directly from the survivors, which I have not so far. John Oliver is still part of the mainstream media, and I really like him on a lot of issues. But foreign people always just have a tendency to, myself included, people have a lot of prejudice sometimes, or pre-existing bias when it comes to foreign policy and other countries. So I don't know. I'm just choosing to like wait on it, like we can watch it as it unfolds, but I think it's important to wait on it. Poilievre is bringing in record fundraising dollars, more than previous Tory leaders. So Pierre Poilievre, our Conservative Party, the leader of the official opposition, is raising more money than the previous Aaron O'Toole, who and what's his name, Andrew Scheer. So this is, I mean, a bit concerning for Canadian politics, where we are worried that this Conservative Party can get a foothold, and we don't think that Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau are going to call an election, although they are kind of like threatening that the supply and confidence agreement might be broken. I feel like with this news coming out that Pierre Poilievre is fundraising very well, um, they'll be even less incentivized to call an election. Um, so let's just like dig into the numbers here. Elections Canada shows that during the last 3 months of 2022, the Conservatives brought in over $9.7 million from more than 66,000 donors. That compares to the Liberals' 5.8 million and the NDP's 2.5 million, with the Bloc Québécois bringing in a little less than $900,000 and the Greens little more than $800,000. Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know the Bloc would only like fundraise like less than $1 million, and like with the Greens just like a little further behind. The Bloc has like so many more seats than the Greens, so it's a bit surprising. But yeah, like these numbers, obviously they don't translate necessarily into votes, but it does translate into the amount of money that they can potentially be willing to invest in a campaign. So the fact that Pierre Poilievre is doing well in fundraising, although not necessarily doing particularly well in the polls, is a bit concerning. And I think myself and like many Canadians, we're just hoping that there's not another election, although it probably would be very good for my stream, because that's elections tend to get people who are not normally interested in politics interested in politics. Okay, and the last thing for today is this is from CBC. So I scoped this much. I scoped this out because I don't usually read CBC, but I wonder how much of that is foreign funding, NT First Squirrel says. That would be a great question to know. I'm not sure if they're allowed any foreign funding. Are they? I don't know. But maybe I'll look into that after this last story. Jagmeet Singh says that the Canada Health Act could be used to challenge private healthcare. Could it? So, this is something that we were talking about in the wake of Doug Ford announcing that he wants to give a greater role to privately run for-profit clinics. And we were hoping that everyone is like, Trudeau, like, please, like, do something. And Trudeau kind of like shrugged his shoulders, and Jagmeet Singh at least said that we need to oppose this, we need to have a public debate on this, and if possible, we should be able to utilize the Canada Health Act, which is supposedly something that can protect us from the privatization of our healthcare system. However, there are, as we kind of learned as the story developed, there's only like so much that can be done about privatization, and a lot of our healthcare system, which we like to virtue signal as something that is universal and that we all have access to, that's not really the case with the current status quo. So we watched this yesterday. Jagmeet Singh brought this up, and the takeaway here, unfortunately, is that wait. Before I get to the conclusion here, this is kind of the important thing about the Canadian Health Act. If hospitals and doctors charge fees for medically necessary services, then the federal government is supposed to deduct $1 from the province or territory's annual grant or CHT for every dollar assessed of the so-called extra billing. So if you bill extra, you get charged the same amount, or like you get that same amount taken away from your funding. So basically there's like no incentive to charge extra. However, the problem is that there's no way to enforce the Canadian Health Act. As someone is saying here, it's not like there are federal inspectors. The provinces are asked to investigate themselves. So there's no mechanism for holding these provinces accountable. So maybe I think maybe that's something that the federal government needs to develop, is like, how do we ensure that our public systems, as much as they can be even considered public, like at least remain that way. So that is the basic news daily rundown for today, February 1st, 2023. Thanks for joining me on my homie Tutaro stream. And if you've made it this far in the YouTube video, then please remember to like and subscribe. We'll be back every weekday with our daily news updates. Peace.